I didn't expect that. So I just finished watching Invincible. I put out a Patreon poll because now I'm asking my patrons to help me decide what I review next, book and movie. Go ahead and throw $1 my way if you'd like to have a voice say in the matter. And Invincible won the poll. Don't worry if you voted for one of the other things. I'm sure I'll get to those two eventually rather soon. But good God! I could not stop watching this show because I just perpetually had a face of like,
it's beautifully horrid.
Fortunately, I did not know a ton about this show going in, and I'm going to keep the first large chunk of this review spoiler-free because I want to talk about it and share my thoughts with y'all, and then I'll get into spoilers at the end. But general premise that you kind of just see in like the trailer, it's a similar take to The Boys, the twisted Superman trope, something that's been quite popular for a large amount of time, something that even DC itself has dabbled in. But Invincible came out quite some time ago, I believe even before The Boys, and it really leans heavily into not trying to change much from what you know from the superhero genre. It's very much so fully embracing the cliches. Often something like The Boys especially has the cliches painted over, but the human story underneath isn't really about that. Invincible is superhero tropes and cliches absolutely, to the point where like they didn't even change the Justice League besides reskinning them. They have the same like origin stories throughout, and there's 2 Supermen stand-in. All it does though is add a realistic level of consequences to superhero actions. Whereas like, hey, if Superman flexed his hand on your head, you'd pop like a grape. So if you have a sensitive stomach to the point where even in animation, extreme gore bothers you, I would not recommend this show. To just about everyone else, I would. It's funny in a very dark comedy way. It tackles hefty themes in a surprisingly fresh way for the superhero genre, and its characters are so lovable despite them feeling so familiar. But that's the point. Invincible is a wonderful example of how you can utilize tropes to serve a wider purpose and not feel tired as a result. Because this is a examination of the superhero genre, though I wouldn't say it's a critique in the same way that The Boys is. The Boys feels like almost a magnifying glass mocking the superhero genre in a way, and it's written by a writer who very much so is embracing that. Whereas Invincible, it's not making fun of heroes, it's not really doing anything aside from just, let's do a more realistic approach and show the perspective of the main character here, someone who's just getting into this level of responsibility, because our main hero, Invincible, is a teenage boy who is just acquiring his powers and now must start fighting crime. And the first large chunk of the show is about him learning to do his best at that. That's the focus of the first half of the season, and then it transitions into something I won't get into because of spoilers, but a lot is reframed, and the abject horror that's brought about from the large threats that become into place are so well portrayed in this animated show. I actually was like, for the first bit of the show, thinking like, I'd actually like to see this in live action. Like the gore would be so extreme, it'd be awesome. But then it was like, okay, that'd be too similar to The Boys. Then once we got in the second half of the season, I realized that having this animated in a way that is a lot like those cartoons we all grew up and loved with, like the Justice League cartoon, made everything that was happening hit more. And I can say I can never go back to watching like the Justice League cartoon and see it the same way again, because how well Invincible just really reframed the level of horror your average person in the street would absolutely feel. Now, I do have a couple of criticisms. I have not read the source material, so if something is explained in the comics, or, you know, you have an issue with something in the show that's because it's different from the comics, I can't get into that. But there were definitely a couple character motivations, especially around a girlfriend character for our main hero, that did not make a ton of sense to me, and there's just kind of a resolving of some conflicts that I can accept because of some of the much larger problems that come about. Like, it is actually realistic sometimes for people to go, forget that, this is a bigger deal, but a couple instances were just like, that shouldn't have been dropped yet. Though in large part, the character drama here did feel real and teenage, but in that Spider-Man way where you're like, yeah, it's teen drama, but it's not like Riverdale on CW. It's more like, no, this is what teens think and do and how they behave, and I appreciated that. The overall structure of the show, I generally appreciated. There were a couple subplots within the middle of the season that I feel like maybe could have been trimmed out, but they also felt like they were setting up things down the road. And from what I understand, this first season is kind of doing the Master and Commander approach to adaptation, where you just kind of chop up a lot of storylines from much further down and bring them in to better help out and flesh out for larger audiences. And from my general impression, it feels like they've done that quite effectively. So this show just went by. I finished it in a day because I really could not keep my eyes off the screen. I guess the small structure complaint I do have was that it was just so clear which plot lines were, this is service for season 2. This is service for it's important now. And really smart writing, the level of writing I really want to see from shows I enjoy, is everything feels necessary in the moment, whereas it's not just happening because it should happen. And if you want to see a clear example of this, there's like a plot line that's going on that's relegated to the side because a character's alarm goes off and it's like, you need to be involved with the main plot now. And so they just leave their side plot to almost no repercussions, and it's like, that's a really clear example of why this didn't need to be happening right now. But I have to be kind of forgiving, because when you're adapting to different mediums, and I don't know how much baggage they're going to have to carry in season 2 versus season 1, so maybe it was just the proper time to get rid of this stuff now, it works. And they also gain so much ground with the government agency not being stupid. The government agency, against all the tropes of comic book police and government agencies, is actually working really intelligently to stop this threat that I still can't say because spoilers, and I'm so happy they made them smart and feel like something that could put up a fight. So yay! Very big subversion there that I deeply, deeply appreciate. Also, the soundtrack, using Run the Jewels, just yes. And that's just another piece of praise for the show. Every bit of violence had an impact. They animated, the sound design is and they follow through with keeping injuries around from episode to episode, and those little things do matter, damn it. And the voice cast, I went into this thinking, okay, J.K. Simmons is gonna be the best person to like bring these characters to life, because I heard his voice in the trailer and I was like, oh, J.K. Simmons, I love him, he'll be my favorite voice performance. Nope, because I didn't realize going in, this also had Mark Hamill in a more minor role, and he killed it. It has people like Seth Rogen, who is a more minor role, but he killed it. I don't want to get too in depth to the cast, because I kept having moments of like, that voice, and then I'd look them up and it'd be someone I adore, and I want you to have that as well. So go into this without checking up the IMDb, and every time you have that moment of like, I know that, who is that, just do it. It's gonna be so much fun. I really like that part of the show too. And I think my final criticism I'm gonna get into in the spoiler-free section is there was some points where characters were having pretty strong reactions to gore and trauma, but then in other scenes they wouldn't show that same reaction, which could be justified within the story of like, hey, you know, this person is having adrenaline in this moment versus like, you know, the shock of this situation is just hitting harder. I get that, but it just felt a bit inconsistent at times. And while I think the final climax of the season was brilliant, the way certain heroes were able to get out of it bugged me. Now, one more criticism I do have for Invincible. While a lot of the supporting characters did bring plenty to the table, there were a few that fell deeply into the side of, I don't see why entirely you're here, and absolutely a couple more pumps need to be put into the writing to have them feel like realistic people who are needed for this story. Like Mark's best friend, I can't even remember his name right now. He just felt almost like cliche gay best friend. He even has like the guy I want to hook up with, and of course gay love interest has bad things happen. Like that stuff, Invincible showed me it's better than this in a lot of ways. So it felt a little jarring to see some characters just not be well realized enough, in my opinion. Which actually, one of the cases I was surprised it avoided this feeling was Amber, Mark's love interest, where I actually went from being like, oh no, she's going to be someone who I don't end up caring about and just going to be the first love interest who he breaks up with, to someone where I'm like, oh no, that she is serving a wider plot, she's involved in the themes, and I like her personality. There's definitely a real character present, and from what some people have told me who have read the comics, it's actually more of a character than was originally provided in the comics, which is nice. Adam Eve and all the Teen Titan equivalents I really enjoyed. There was a couple that did not have enough talking lines or were relegated to like, okay, they're going to be explored in the future, but they're not explored enough here now. And I'm looking forward to see them explored because what we were given was enticing. And before we leave the spoiler-free section, just to note, there's always a immediate post-credit scene. Don't accidentally skip it. I did that once. Don't, because they are very important. And now I'm going to talk about some spoilers here. Not things at the end of the season, but stuff specifically that happens in the first episode. So if you consider that a spoiler, bounce out.
3, 2, 1, go.
Wow, the massacre that sets the tone. So episode 1, I was kind of underwhelmed until, of course, that credit scene happened where the Justice League is absolutely brutalized in one of the most just rapid mass murderings I've ever witnessed. And it's so heartless. That's when the show got me 100% invested. Not because I'm into shows for just gore and over-the-top violence, but because it showed me, oh, this is going the boys' route. And it's going to take what the boys promised and take it to a 10. I liked The Boys. This is doing a lot of what The Boys did for a different reason. So I think they're very different viewing experiences, but to a much stronger effect, largely because I believe it is animated and they can do that without any repercussions. This is also another wonderful example of how streaming services have allowed us as audiences to see things just be amped up in terms of content, which is a lot of the times better for the art that's trying to be crafted. And this is an example of that. If you remove that scene and just told us he massacred the Justice League, there would not be nearly the level of threat and intimidation and the theme of trauma that comes in later. Just wow, way to shock an audience in the way that shocking an audience should be done. The failure of episode 1 comes in where I just didn't really care that much about Mark right away. He was so tropey that it felt parody-esque, which was like bothersome because not much else about the show came across as entirely parody, aside from some of the smaller throwaway jokes like the way they're portraying Aquaman. Aside from that, it was just trying to be a Justice League, and I was like, okay, how's this going to play out? But by the end of the second or third episode, I was invested in Mark's character. The level of parody blending with actually getting invested in like what's going on really started to balance out. So if you don't love the first episode, give it a solid 2 or 3. But now we're gonna go full on in spoilers. So if you have not watched season 1, please do. Before continuing on this point, maybe drop a like and subscribe before you leave, please. Omni-Man! 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 Omni-Man. Wow! Rarely has a character provided such little personality intentionally and it been oh so effective. The lack of personality is a part of the fear provided. He's just standing, like they even animate him in a way where he's just kind of feeling present. And the more I paid attention, the more off he felt, the more I realized the small little details they were putting in to let you just like subconsciously know he's off. I already had it spoiled what exactly was going to happen there, so I wasn't obviously like mind blown or anything by like when the massacre did occur. But I did go back and rewatch episode 1, and really from the get-go, they are showing you Omni-Man is not right, and I love the presentation around trauma when it comes to his abusive relationship with his son, because this is an absolutely abusive relationship emotionally and physically, to the point where he's yelling at his son not to feel emotion around death throughout the show. Like he's saying you need to not care about your loved ones. And then of course it gets physical when he starts, one, beating his son in training, and then taking that into the actual fight they have at the end, where he's really going harder on his son in that fight than it felt like he did in any of his others. Which, yeah, he like ripped another guy in half, but in terms of like the raw emotion coming off of him when he's just beating his son, oh, it hurt. It hurt. God. And yeah, I was a bit bothered by how Omni-Man just like had a flashback to, actually, I do love my son, so I'm going to leave now. Bye. It just, that felt very plot convenient. But everything around that within the climax, I adored. Omni-Man felt so wrong in how he just demolished everything they threw at him. He felt like a force of nature, just moving through barely obstacles until they did release this monster, which did slow him. But even then, it was like, is it really a threat, or is he just kind of mildly inconvenienced? They even re-released the Superman equivalent from the Justice League, and he just butchers them again. It's like, yeah, he's a fight, but it's like watching Mike Tyson in his prime go up against an amateur boxer. It's like, yeah, the guy's hitting him, but it's still Mike Tyson. Good luck. You're gonna die soon. The character I'm probably most curious to see how they handle going forward is Adam Eve, because she is taking a path I've never seen someone like fully commit to for superheroes, which is just going the pacifist route of like, I'm going to use my powers to more actively help day-to-day life. And I think with her power set specifically, that's really interesting. So I hope they don't just, and please don't spoil in the comments down below, I hope they don't just like take her and throw her back into combat because it's like, oh, well, she's back in it now because reasons, and instead they commit to having her go down this alternative path for a superhero. And I think as like the Starfire equivalent, that's a very appropriate, a believable approach to a development there. Overall though, I am feeling a really solid 8 out of 10 with a possibility bump up of 8.5. I was glued to the screen. I have a decent amount of nitpicks, but nothing that's coming in as like large, huge, I did not love it criticism. It's solid all the way around, and as long as you got the stomach for it, definite recommendation for me. Anyway guys, let me know what you think of Invincible in the comments down below. Be sure to join the Patreon if you'd like to vote on what I'm going to review next, though next will be One Piece, then vote on what I'll review after that, and have a good one, y'all. Peace. And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my latest high-tier patrons, Hassan Hamad, Timothy Finley, Gavin Harrington, and Amber Pfaff. Have a great one, y'all. Peace.